Hello world! Anonymous's latest operation had them hack into the controversial hosting provider Epik, but we now know what may have been the point of entry. And ransomware gangs are now threatening to erase the data of any victims which hire professional ransom negotiators, but the reason why isn't what you might think. That's in today's episode of The Week Web, where we break down and dissect cybersecurity related tech news. You've probably heard at this point about the Epik data breach perpetrated by Anonymous last week. Well, there have been some new juicy developments. We now know what may have been the likely point of intrusion, as well as some details surrounding the piss-poor security standards implemented by Epik. In addition, there's been a rather colourful press conference with Epik's CEO. Now, I didn't cover this story initially, but we now have a much better understanding of what happened. But first, a lowdown of events. Epik is a web hosting provider, much like GoDaddy, DreamHost, Bluehost, etc. What makes Epik different is that they're not afraid to host websites which have been deplatformed by mainstream hosting providers. It's no debate that Epik does host controversial sites. The debate is about how objectionable the sites they host actually are. Some of the websites they've given refuge to are, in my opinion, shall we say, of pretty poor taste, but others, I would argue, are merely disliked because they cater to people of opposing political opinions. In either case, Epik has become a magnet for sites to the right of centre. This makes them a ripe target for political activists, in particular Anonymous. Anonymous breached Epik's defenses and leaked a decade's worth of data, totaling 180 gigabytes, which is massive. Anonymous called this dump Operation Epik Fail. Bit inevitable, that naming when your company's called Epik. They leaked the spoils through distributed denial of secrets, which in their own words is a non-profit devoted to enabling the free transmission of data. The leak includes an array of personal data on the people that have used Epik for hosting, including domain purchases, transfers, payment histories, and even unhashed passwords, a mortal sin. The storage of user data by Epik seems to have been absolutely abysmal. They've seemingly broken every rule in the data storage playbook. The fact that Epik stored user data in this way at all is difficult to forgive if you're a customer. To make matters worse, the breach includes customer information going back 10 years, so presumably the leak even includes people who ditched Epik as their hosting provider long ago. Epik initially refused to even acknowledge the breach, even with a torrent out there in the wild and the veracity of the leak going unchallenged. However, they did eventually send a disclosure email to their customers, which rather strangely, and I haven't seen this before in corporate communication, invoked the divine in helping to cure the evil in people that had committed this breach. Strangely, on Epik's sites, there's no mention of this hack. Their blog and news sections are particularly bare. Usually in the event of a breach, a responsible company will have a running commentary on their site, a page wherein they detail what customer information is affected and mitigation actions customers should take, such as changing passwords and so on. Epik's CEO, one Rob Monster, and yes, that is his name, Mr. Monster, the CEO hosted a video conference to address the situation, within which he admitted that his company had been breached, as well as explained the origins of the hack.
Working hypothesis is that it was a backup, and I'm not going to say where the backup was found, but I think it was a backup.
The almost 4-hour-long conference was hectic, to say the least. It included Mr. Monster trading insults with journalists, which accused him of platforming doxers.
Let's take turns. I will totally talk to you.
So you're not even addressing my point, though. I want to talk about Joey Camp.
How much cocaine did you do today? Come on, let's just chill.
No.
Wow.
We don't know for sure what caused the breach, however there is one potential intrusion point in the form of a vulnerability reported to Epik many months ago. One Corbin Leo discovered a remote code execution flaw in Epik's website way back in January. From an interview with TechCrunch, Leo said, "A library used on Epik's Whois page for generating PDF reports of public domain records had a decade-old vulnerability which allowed anyone to remotely run code directly on the internal server without any authentication. You could just paste this line of code in there and execute any command on their servers. Epik doesn't have a bug bounty program or way of formally disclosing flaws, so instead he did the responsible thing and contacted Epik's chief executive, Mr. Monster, over LinkedIn. A read receipt indicates Mr. Monster read the message, but no action was ever taken. At the time, Monster thought it was just spam. Leo is pretty confident that's how they got owned." Have I Been Pwned has updated their database with Epik's data. Now, I always link my sources in the description, though in this case I will not be linking to the leaked data for obvious reasons. Let me know what you think of this anonymous operation in the comments. Do you think this operation was warranted? You know, it's a weird one. Hosting websites which dox journalists isn't something that can be defended, but on the other hand, two of the most prominent examples I've read about that are given for Epik's hosting of far-right content are 8chan and the Daily Stormer. Now, Epik kicked 8chan from using their services, so they deplatformed them just like Cloudflare did. And the Daily Stormer, an objectively racist news site, was from my research never really hosted by Epik. In reality, Epik acquired a company called BitMitigate, which was at the time providing hosting for them. When Epik realized this, they kicked off the site from using BitMitigate. When two of the most cited examples of Epik hosting extreme content turn out to be not so quite straightforward, it makes me think the whole drama of Epik hosting awful things may at least be somewhat exaggerated. But it's a sticky subject, and there are examples of sites that Epik hosts which aren't too pleasant. But anyhow, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Speaking of database leaks and how you can defend against the effects of them, the easiest way to level up your security is by using a password manager. I recently surveyed you guys on Instagram. Make sure to follow me, by the way. I found half of you guys aren't even using one. I mean, come on. Reusing passwords is obviously an awful idea, but even storing passwords in your browser is a massive no-no. It's very common for malware to simply hoover up autofill credentials. Now, this video is sponsored by Roboform. I recently switched to their password manager. Setting up was hassle-free. Importing passwords from Chrome and other browsers was super easy. Then I just downloaded their browser extension and mobile app, which runs on Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, and Android, and I was done. Cross-platform automatic password syncing, safe in the knowledge that malware can't so easily scoop up your credentials if you're hacked. Greatly enhance your security today for the price of a pizza. If you use the link in the description, you'll get a whole year's access for just $16. That's little more than $1 a month. And in the unlikely scenario you aren't happy with Roboform for any reason, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Roboform, linked in the description. A new tactic of ransomware gangs has emerged. Threaten to immediately delete files if victim companies hire professional ransomware negotiators to try and lower ransom demands. Now, typically after a company is victimized with ransomware, the ransomware gang links the victim to a dark website where they can communicate with their captors. It's kind of like a help desk. This gives the victim the possibility to negotiate a ransom payment with the gang. At this point, many victim companies hire ransomware recovery specialists to help them negotiate with the attackers. As you can imagine, ransomware gangs aren't too fond of these ransomware recovery experts. Recently, the Ragnarlocker gang adopted the strategy of pledging to simply delete data if victims hired professional negotiators. Following this, the Griefcore ransomware group hopped on the bandwagon and enlisted a similar strategy. These two gangs both published blog posts on their dark websites explaining their reasoning behind the new policies. Of course, the reasoning they provide is completely divorced from reality, but we'll get to the real reason behind this shortly. It's kind of funny. Griefcore in particular paints these negotiators almost as leeches, just wanting to profit from the situation. Now, I'm going to have to paraphrase Griefcore's blog post here. The English is just as bad as any other cybercriminal. They point out recovery companies get paid regardless of whether the ransom is paid, and alleged negotiators aren't interested in a solution. That the strategy of recovery companies is not to pay the requested amount or to solve the case, but to stall, thus frustrating Griefcore's attempts to make coin. No wonder they don't like them. Then we get to the real reason ransomware gangs are turning to this new tactic. Griefcore is one of the many ransomware gangs subject to OFAC sanctions. OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets Control. The sanctions make it illegal for any US citizen or business to transact with Griefcore at all, for any reason. Ransomware negotiators will be wary of this, and it's in fact part of their job to check if a gang is under sanctions from OFAC, thus scuppering any chance of Griefcore getting paid. Breaching OFAC sanctions, even if you weren't aware the entity you were transacting with is under sanctions, come with some pretty hefty penalties, including fines of up to $20 million and 30-year prison sentences. It's no surprise ransomware gangs want these ransomware specialists out of the picture. If you enjoy this kind of video, make sure to help me out by tickling the like button for the YouTube AI, as well as turning on those sub notifications. If you want to see what goes on behind the scenes, make sure to follow me on the Instagrams. I'm @Jonty, and will of course link it in the video description. If you're looking for something to watch next, go check out my previous video on how Anonymous hacked and defaced the Texas Republican website. As always, sources will be linked in the video description. Stay tuned for more hacking videos, and have a good one.